Hello and welcome to our 10 Minutes to series. These are series meant to address topics that are hopefully useful to you, topics that we can cover in 10 slides or less and in 10 minutes or less so that you have time to view these maybe while you're making lunch or waiting for your child to finish soccer practice and come away with some useful skills that will help you in your research program and beyond. So with that, I will share my screen. All right. So today's topic is funding your work through multiple agencies or foundations, and this is a companion presentation to another 10-minute topic entitled Creating Your 5-Year Plan, and you can find all of these on our website. These are also all YouTube videos. So most folks, when they start their first academic job, think of a research idea as being in a box like this. I certainly did when I started out, and there's no real wrong way of thinking about this. It's useful to think of it in a box in the sense that it's sort of bounded and it has a beginning and an end, and so you sort of know when you're done. And hopefully this box has other smaller boxes within it that are these projects. If you're thinking in terms of something like NSF, these might be the 4 specific aims of your project or the 4 hypotheses you hope to address in your project. And ideally, these projects translate to hopefully at least 1 paper each. So as you're breaking these down into sort of the most meaningful units for publication, hopefully each project is a paper. We don't want to break these down too small. We don't want them to be in these minimum publishable units, as we say. We'd like them to be robust papers with real contributions, substantial data, major hypotheses that you're testing, but papers that are useful to your academic community, the folks in your discipline. We do want to see this work published, of course, because if you don't publish it, it's as if it was never done. And you may be thinking of this box as an NSF box. I certainly did when I started out. My postdoc advisor and my PhD advisor both were funded exclusively through NSF funding, and they came up in a day where you had a good idea and got an NSF grant, and you stayed on that gravy train throughout your career. And so you just kept getting substantially or sequentially more NSF grants. In more current times, that's not as simple of a thing to do. Not that it was easy back then, but it's become substantially more difficult. And most of us need to think about how we can diversify our message, diversify our funding program, and diversify our sponsor base to support the work that we do. When you're thinking just about one sponsor, you've got a series of boxes like this, and they're discrete in space and time potentially, and so you have these sort of random overlapping grant ideas, but maybe not as clear of a trajectory. Each of them are contained in a box and may overlap or may not overlap, as I've tried to illustrate in this slide here. But if you think of your projects like this, and these may be the same 4 projects that were contained in that box earlier, but now I've drawn them as circles to indicate there's something more like a Venn diagram as opposed to discrete boxes in space and time. And I've aligned them here to indicate your career trajectory moving from the bottom of the screen to the top of the screen. And so projects 1 through 4 might be aligned like this, and this might be a very good NSF grant. But if you think about how these circles can be rearranged, you might want to think about sort of maybe additional projects that can tag along to the sides of these side projects, if you will. But if you combine them with substantial pieces of those original 4, now you've got the bases of something that you might be able to pitch to a different funding agency. That might be NIH or the Department of Defense or the Department of Education, for example. Now, that's not to say you want to be disingenuous and pitch yourself in an area where you really have no expertise or no ability to do the work. But you can think creatively about how you can match your message to the goals of different funding agencies where there is a potential match to be made. And one of the most important things to do to figure out if there can be a match is to reach out to program officers or to different officers within those organizations and find out what those organizations' goals are currently. And if you can, what those goals might look like coming up in future years so that you can see if your research can align to those things. And then if you begin to think about these projects stacking up, you may discover that you have not just this one main career trajectory that's moving from the bottom of the screen to the top of the screen, but you've got substantial and important additional trajectories that are moving off at laterals to this main career trajectory. And so you've got all these different projects, they overlap to different degrees, and they might occur in different times and different spaces of your career trajectory. But over time, you might find that there are projects that are taking you in these directions. So, for example, I've got in green here that represents sort of an NIH axis, an evolution of your ideas, your projects that speak to NIH goals and their mission, and a DoD axis. So, this is the evolution of your projects and your ideas that speak to the DoD mission. Now, all of these still fit within your mission, right? They are tangential to or are related to your main trajectory here, which might be an NSF axis, this main axis moving from the bottom of the graph to the top of the graph. But you can rearrange these virtually, these circles, in time and space to recreate ideas that can fit then the goals of these different granting agencies. And when you can match your needs and your goals to the mission of these different granting agencies, that opens up funding opportunities to you in potentially exponential kinds of ways. Now, that can get a little intractable in terms of tracking where you're heading, because what I've drawn for you there is no longer this nice lateral path for yourself, but it's got several branches coming off to the side, and you could imagine that your research program could become very, very branchy over time. And so to keep track of that, I recommend just a very simple worksheet like this one here. You can access this exact one. It's a Google worksheet that we can share with you if you are accessing the PowerPoint after this presentation. That link, the hyperlink is active, or I can also send it to you. But it's a very straightforward worksheet to recreate for yourself as well. At the top, just enter the sort of years over which you're envisioning a particular path that you're heading on. And these priority projects for seeking fund here are those projects that were in those bubbles, projects 1 through 12 or so that you saw on those previous slides. And then these represent different either sponsors or different opportunities within a single sponsor agency. So NIH and NSF, for example, have several different sorts of directorates, and within those directorates, multiple divisions, each of which that speak to different areas of research. And you may find that you can speak to, with your research, more than one of those areas of research. A rough idea of the budget that you're going to need for each of those projects. Again, the program sponsor for that, and the years over which you think you might be conducting that work. And then any important notes here, like, do I need to come up with match funding? Am I going to need to try to support a course buyout? Am I going to try to find the funds here to support a graduate student or a postdoc? Then you want to also identify for yourself, if you're moving into an area with a particular grant or particular granting agency, am I going to need to find particular collaborators, for example, collaborators that will complement but enhance my particular skill set, allow me to ask different kinds of questions that are complementary to the questions that make up sort of my main axis of my research? And is there particular support needed? For example, might I need support staff to pull off the actual goals of the grant? Maybe I will need a technician. Or if I'm thinking of something larger, like a grant that might fund undergraduate or graduate research students, a programmatic grant, am I going to need a program manager? So what kinds of support might I need to get the work done? And this kind of worksheet should be viewed as a dynamic document. It's a living document, if you will. It's the kind of thing that you can be updating and changing all the time. It's not a permanent contract with yourself, but it is something that's super handy to revisit on either a quarterly or every 6 month sort of basis. And it's particularly useful when it comes time to filling out those annual reviews or your mid-tenure review or even your tenure documents, so that you can document for yourself sort of where you've been and, very importantly, where you're going, so that you can show that trajectory that you're on. So thank you for joining me for this quick tidbit on finding multiple sponsors for your research. If you have any questions, I would love to hear from you. I'd also love to know if you have particular subjects you'd like for us to try to address in this format in 10 slides or less or 10 minutes or less. Thanks, and have a fantastic day.